Council here tonight, and I'll start with the land acknowledgement. On July 25th, 2022, we acknowledge that the sacred land on which Smith Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral unceded territory of the Algonquin-Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We are also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in making the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smith Falls. We are mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history, nation building through peace, friendship, and being mindful of generations to come. So we'll begin the meeting, and I'll call for any amendments to the agenda this evening. Okay, seeing none, any disclosures of monetary interest arising from the agenda? Seeing none, if one appears unexpectedly, please declare at that time.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yes, yeah, sorry, Mayor Pinko.
Yes, just trying to find my copy of the agenda here. I believe it's the first in-camera item. I will declare a conflict of interest. Pecuniary interest will not participate in discussion. Okay,
so noted. I previously had a conflict with that. I no longer do, so I'll be participating in the first in-camera and the second as well. So just to note that as well. We have one delegation tonight, and I want to welcome Lori Huber and Carol Fuller from KPMG Enterprise. And welcome, ladies. And you don't look like Howard, so that's good. It's a good thing. But we're here to deliver some good news, I hope, to us, and that will be the presentation of our 2021 consolidated financial statements. So I'll turn it over to you. I think you both are going to do it, so I'm not sure who's starting, Carol or Lori, but over to you guys.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's our pleasure to be here tonight, and you are not the first person to tell me that I do not resemble Howard. So that has been entertaining as we've been working through some of the client files this year. So it's our pleasure to be here this evening. The purpose of our presentation is to walk you through the highlights of our 2021 audit. Our audit findings report was pre-circulated as part of your package, but I will share my screen as long as it does allow me to do so. And hopefully we can follow along. And certainly at the end of our presentation, both Carol and I would welcome any questions at all from the group. So with that, moving into our presentation, you will see in terms of where we are today with respect to the audit is we are essentially complete, subject to having the conversations here this evening related to those charged with governance. We are essentially complete, subject to the ordinary customary items that we would need to complete our audit. We have pre-circulated as well a draft audit opinion that you will see in the financial statement package themselves, along with at the balance of our presentation here. Without stealing the entire thunder of our presentation, it really was another good year. Another good year in the sense that it was an audit transition year, as KPMG did acquire Allen & Partners in the fall of 2021. So very grateful for Carol's leadership and institutional knowledge to transition us through for fiscal 2021. So in terms of other items to bring to your attention on this slide, in terms of our independence, we should be very mindful of our independence as we speak to you at least once annually formally, because as your external auditors, we are very much required to be independent in order to provide an independent perspective on the financial statements themselves. So I'm pleased to report here this evening, there's nothing from a non-audit perspective that might be thought to encroach on our independence. So we certainly have continued to remain independent through the course of our audit. Jumping into the next slide here, you will see we have provided you with an overview of any significant changes that we might have had to make relative to our audit plan. So at the start of our audit, it's ordinary and customary to sit down with certainly key individuals, both from those charged with governance, including Mayor Pankow and the senior leadership team, to develop our audit plan as we were going in to execute our audit. So there's a lot of words on the slide here, but certainly the summary overall, I can certainly be pleased to say that we have completed our audit in accordance with our plan. There was no significant deviations from that plan to bring to your attention. So with that, I'm actually actually going to pass it over to Carol, who's going to walk us through some of the highlights of the actual numbers themselves for fiscal 2021.
Great. Thank you, Lori. Thank you for having us tonight to peruse through the statements. And I'd like to start off with thanking the town staff, number one, for the preparation for the audit, and number two, for the cooperation we had throughout the audit. We always have cooperation. This year, there was some more documentation as we switched over to a new audit methodology. So I do want to thank the staff for their cooperation in that. As we go through this page, on the right-hand side, we've got some comments on some of the major shifts in there. What I would really speak to is that mid number called net debt. You can see that our net debt position went down about $6 million. That's a combination of the two big factors in there is that first, our actual debt went down about 900,000. And second is our reserves increased, which brings that number down to, by that number, and it's a very, very good big step to take in 1 year. You'll also see that we note that the tangible capital assets, there were some significant improvements this year in regards basically to roads. The final net asset position was around 97 million. And I'm just going to take you to the next slide.
Carol?
Oh, yes.
Sorry, it's Jake. Is there any way to make that a little bit larger? Just so I know, yeah. That's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody can see that now?
Okay.
Thank you, Carol.
No, thank you. So if we go to the next slide, a little new format this year is we put the tangible capital assets in a pie chart. And I think Councillor McKenna already commented on he liked the format. So I like this format as well. If we think about your tangible capital assets, they're around $97 million. What is unique to a town per se compared to say a township? Or to even an upper tier like a county is that split between buildings and say roads and water and sewer. And that is because unique to towns often are infrastructure buildings like water and sewer assets and often recreational facilities that form a more significant component of the tangible capital assets, as do our roads. But our other big investments is water and sewer, and that all that good stuff that lies under the ground that we have to take good care of because it's probably our biggest investment that we have. If we roll along to the next page, it is a snapshot of our financial position. So again, on the right, we have some descriptions of what some of the major shifts are in that. I would speak to the taxation on the commercial, and the comment that is there is that throughout the year, we have at the start of the year what's called our returned roll. And that's the assessment which we base our tax rates on. But during the year, we will get from MPAC supplementaries on new assessment. And those supplementaries might be for several years, as it sometimes takes that long to get them on the roll. So that is not a tax rate increase for this year. That is really the result of increased mid-year assessment. We will see some of the impact in that in our next year's roll, but again, it was a multi-year assessment, so we won't see that jump every year. If we slide down to the expenses, basically when you look at the expenses, we were at 28.1 million. Last year, we were at 27.9. Basically, that's just under a 1% increase in operating expenses for the year. That's not our capital picture, but that's our operating picture. We ended the year with a $3.9 million surplus. Again, that really ties to those numbers at the top of the page, the taxation, and it ties to the, to the capital, the shifts in the capital during the year. If we go along the next page, so that page right there tells us how we spend our money on which departments. The next page, so you can see it's by general government. The next page is kind of the categories of expenses. Those numbers are set out in more detail back on note 16, page 20 of your statements. But again, this pie chart lets us see that the bulk of our expenditures, about 45%, is in salaries and wages. Again, that makes sense in a municipal environment because we really are in the service business when you think of things such as recreational facilities, police, fire. So those numbers really are common and make sense for a municipal government. If we roll along to the next one, these pages you'll see this year, but you probably won't see them next year. We'll have a transition year next year to using more of a KPMG data analytics. But for this year, to keep some of the same things familiar, we have included the 5-year review. If we scroll through here, a couple of things I would note is the taxable assessment over the 4 or 5 year period has grown about 8%. As I noted, that's on the return roll. We don't see the impact of that supplementary yet. If we scroll down the page, you can see our tax rates of taxation have remained very consistent over the years. We haven't had any dramatic increases. And if you look at our percentage, our tax arrears percentage, you know, your tax department is doing a very good job in adhering to the collection policy and making sure the taxes are received when they're due and working with ratepayers, you know, to get those amounts in. The province considers a low risk threshold to be less than 10%, and you're at 4.62%, and you can see we've had a steady decline over the 5 years. So I believe the town of Smith Falls is doing a very good job in their tax collection efforts. If we scroll down a little bit more, there's a little chart there on the trends of your revenues across the year. Again, I would emphasize that increase in taxation really does go back to that supplementary. It's rolled up in this schedule. So it's not like a great tax rate increase. It is that supplementary and the impact in that 1 year. If we scroll down a little bit more, there's some numbers here I would point out is that you can see that over the years, our net debt has gone down $1.2 million. Why that's impressive for the town of Smith Falls is if you were to look at your capital investment over the last 5 years, and then you look at the debt going down, to me, you really are moving in the direction of a strong asset management position in balancing that asset additions with your debt and with your reserve structure. If we scroll down a little bit more, the stories on these pages kind of talk a little bit about your overall position, the asset consumption ratio, the reserves as percentage. They are trending in the right direction. But I think in this regard, the big picture is the asset management plan and the importance of that. I think these are good. They're a good picture. They're telling us where we're going, or where we've been, excuse me. I think the asset management plan is the key driving document as we go forward, because that's going to let us know how we need to manage all the resources. So good track record. I think it's that asset management plan and where you're headed. And I think that would basically take me to the highlights of these. And Lori, did you want to go from here?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Carol. So the similar story will carry on in terms of, certainly it is a good news story from the state of the audit. So stopping here just briefly in terms of our audit plan related to our materiality, which is a pretty important audit concept as it certainly scales out or scopes out the size and scale of the detailed work behind our audit. So as part of our audit plan, we had set materiality to be a $500,000 overall materiality amount on the financial statements as a whole. So to the extent we identified any differences in excess of 25,000, which is sheer math, 5% of the overall materiality amount, that was our threshold upon which we had conversations with the team in terms of what we saw in the accounts versus what we thought we should see in the accounts. So I'm pleased to report today we've only identified 2 uncorrected items that have not been incorporated into the financial statements, because you can certainly see here they are not material to the financial statements as a whole. One of the items is something that we've seen certainly consistent across the sector in terms of how certain funds related to Safe Restart, which was one of the several provincial programs related to the outcome, I would say, of the COVID-19 pandemic, certainly on the sector. So that was a matter of timing this year compared to previous years, but you can see at the end of this fiscal year, so December 31, 2021, that has been balanced out. So there is no net impact at the ending balance. We have flagged one other item for discussion in the upcoming fiscal year related to a specific accrual that doesn't necessarily meet the definition of a liability today. So pleased to report we have identified 2 minor differences that are certainly relatively immaterial to overall materiality. So we agree with management's position that certainly we do not believe they materially misstate the financial statements, which is why we are proposing a clean audit report for fiscal 2021. So in terms of control deficiencies, just as a reminder to the group, as part of a KPMG audit, similar to Allen & Partners in previous years, we are very much required to gain a detailed understanding of all of the significant processes that culminate into the financial reporting process. So things like revenue recognition that would include taxation, things like procurement, HR, payroll, all of those things form part of our audit in terms of an understanding of the systems, processes, and controls. So to the extent we identify any significant gaps or deficiencies in any of those areas, we would certainly highlight those here today for our discussion. But again, pleased to report we have not identified any significant deficiencies. However, to the extent we identify any areas for improvement that are relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, or anything that we see best practices elsewhere, we certainly do have conversations and communications with the team as part of a management letter that is separate to this document. In terms of the financial statements themselves, once you've had a chance to peruse them, you will see that the accounting policies continue to be disclosed in the notes to the financial statements. And going into this year, it really was a status quo year. So there was no significant changes either from the auditing standard side of the house or the accounting standards. However, just to keep it certainly our eyes on the horizon as to what is coming, there is a fairly significant new audit standard coming into play for all municipal governments that will come in fiscal 2023, and it's titled Asset Retirement Obligations. So we will continue to work and have conversations and more detailed conversations as certainly time allows to make sure that the team is certainly well positioned and able to adequately adopt that standard. In terms of the balance of a report, I will just pause here briefly on our deliverable, which is our independent auditor's report. So all of these things certainly tied together come out to our independent auditor's report. So as we look at everything as a whole in terms of our findings, no significant findings. So we have proposed, you will hear it called different things in many ways. So it's a clean audit report, or it's an unqualified audit report, or it's an unmodified audit report. However, it says that in our opinion, we believe the financial statements do present fairly in all material respects the financial activities of the corporation for the year ended December 31, 2021. The only difference that you will see, certainly compared to this year, compared to previous years and any other really audit clean report in Canada, we are required to draw the user's attention to the financial statements to say that the ending balances of the previous fiscal year form part of our current year opening numbers. And as part of that, we were required to make sure that we flag for a user of the financial statements that fact to the extent that the 2020 audited financial statements were audited by another firm and the date thereupon. So that will be an in-year transition for fiscal 2021 year only, and that will go away in future years. Beyond that, it is a standard audit report. It will be dated the date upon which council accepts and approves the financial statements. And really the balance of our report from here is informational items really only. If there were any questions on anything you've heard or anything you've seen in the report, both Carol and I would be happy to take those questions at this time.
Thank you, Lori. Any questions, comments from my colleagues? Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lori, you had mentioned that one of the things that we're going to have to start preparing for in the future years is this asset retirement obligation. I assume I know what that means, but perhaps you could clarify exactly what that means, and maybe staff could indicate, you know, roughly what they think that's going to equate to, if my assumption about what that means is true.
Absolutely. So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll try to give you a 30,000-foot overview rather than in getting into the details. But certainly today, I would say the requirement to put certain liabilities on your balance sheet does not exist. So we did have a new standard called contaminated sites that was very prescriptive, very, very dependent on whether something was in productive use, non-productive use. Think forward to asset retirement obligations. Any of those sort of decision trees, yes, no, maybe, are sort of out the window. It's an all-in standard to look at the entire inventory of assets within the corporation to determine whether or not there are any requirements to remedy those assets, either to original condition or related to legal or environmental contamination, all of those good sorts of things. So if we were to think about buildings tend to be aged infrastructure and might contain asbestos in those buildings. Today, there is absolutely nothing on the financial statements related to asbestos. In this new standard, there will be a requirement to inventory how much is in there and what the estimate is to remedy that asbestos in that building. Other things like underground storage tanks, all of those sorts of things will come into play as well, even though, today it's, it doesn't meet any requirements, but at some point in the future it will. So it will either change your annual surplus to the extent that there's a change to the asset base, and then there will be a liability on the books as well, so that when those costs are actually incurred, that will draw down the liability. So that's a 30,000-foot view. Hopefully I've tried to give you an assessment of what it will look like in the future, but you will start to hear more and more. It's fairly significant for the municipal sector as a whole. And there was a lot of conversation to make sure that we are all adequately prepared.
Thank you, Laurie. And Mr. Chair, if I may, perhaps Janet could just, I know that this is still early stages, but do you have an idea of kind of what types of the assets the municipality should be concerned with that are going to be directly impacted by this, something that we haven't already been talking about or contemplating at this point?
So through the chair, we have had conversations with management. So now they're at the point of identifying just that, what is going to be part of it. We have not started costing out or scoping what the final cost will be. At some point in time through the year, Carol has suggested we have workshops with like-minded, like-sized municipalities, and we'll work through some of the processes to get us to those final figures.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that was a great question, Councillor Dwyer. I found that, and a great answer, by the way. I did comment on the format, and I want to reinforce and thank the staff and our new auditors for this format. I think it is sophisticated enough to meet council's needs. I've looked at audited statements for most of my career, and they are not user-friendly, let's say. So I also think they're quite usable to the general public, and I really would encourage the public to download or go online and look at a copy of this if they really want to understand the town's financial positions. I think it's quite understandable, and if they do have questions, as always, reach out to one of us or staff and to get that. So that was my comment. I had one question, if I may. On page 3 of the audit of your PowerPoint, it refers to additional audited related work. And in the past, in other jurisdictions, I've been on boards of directors, and we've asked the auditors to undertake some additional audit work that is not normally inside the scope of that. And for municipalities, I've had ideas around this, but do you have examples of what some of that additional work might look like if municipalities, for example, I worry about cybersecurity and doing a risk assessment independent of our staff. Is that something that could be one of those additional audited related work examples?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll certainly take a first cut at the question, and certainly Carol, feel free to chime in as well. So maybe without getting into a lot of detail, we do see a lot of conversations in many organizations in terms of a particular area of focus. So we will take those conversations into play as part of our audit planning. And so we are required as part of any financial statement audit in Canada to develop an unpredictable procedure every year. So the fact that it needs to be unpredictable, we can't be doing the same thing every year, so that, management are kept a little bit more on their toes, not knowing exactly, what's coming year after year. So, for this year, we look at things like, procurement, whether, there's expense reports and approvals and P cards and bank reconciliations and all those sorts of things. The other thing that we've hit the corporation with this year as part of the transition to KPMG is we have developed, over the course of the last few years, a number of questionnaires on sort of ancillary items outside of the audit to give us a 30,000-foot view of things that perhaps should be probed further. So a great example of that is actually cybersecurity. So in every one of our financial statement audits, we have, a 30,000-foot view, 6 or 8 questions. Are there any significant red flags? It's not a review by any stretch, but it's a questionnaire that we can have conversations to determine where we go from there. We do a similar exercise related to indirect tax, because as we all know, indirect tax is complicated. So we do embed those into our audit in terms of the common things that we do see. Enterprise risk management tends to be one that is coming up more and more. And I also will say there's a new acronym that everyone's talking a lot about, and that's related to ESG. So those are things that are sort of coming in the future. So we do continue to refresh things annually, but certainly if there's any particular interest in any particular area, welcome that feedback, and we can incorporate that into our audit in any fiscal year. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it gives you a flavor of what we might not necessarily be putting on the screen in terms of the numbers themselves.
Thank you, and it does answer my question. And for me, and it's not related to your work, but is the process to get that question from council to staff so that it's incorporated. And it wouldn't necessarily have to come from the auditor. It could come from the council. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Mayor Penko's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Carol and Lori. And as much as this is a necessary requirement, it's also a fascinating snapshot in time and the opportunity to look back and sort of see where we were and where we are today, and if we're heading in the right direction. And on that, can one of you take a moment and just walk through the financial indicators? I'm always sort of fascinated about keeping an eye on these and making sure that we are continuing to move in the right direction.
Perhaps through you, Mr. Chair, I will pass that over to Carol.
So Mayor Panko, are you speaking to the 5-year review?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think when we look at those, a couple things that I like to look at is I look at that assessment growth to see where it's kind of gone, and I look at it in relationship to the taxation revenue, and that kind of tells you that split between inflation and growth. As I noted earlier, for us, that particular one this year is skewed a bit by that supplementary assessment. But if we look at some of the others and we look at the trends, we talked about the tax arrears declining to 4.62%. If we look at the operating revenue, the net financial assets as a percentage of operating revenue, that has improved as well. And the provincial low risk indicator is anything less than or 20%, and we are at 12%. So, we're trending there in a very good ratio of where our operating revenues are going in relationship to our overall position. And as well, if we were to look at the net long-term debt, we've talked about the fact that it's gone down about $1.2 million, that we are using less of our debt in relationship to our annual repayment limit. Overall, our cash flow, our financial assets to liabilities, has remained very steady and has actually improved. And if you look at our debt charges to total operating revenues, which is another provincial low risk indicator, at one point we were slightly above that, and now we are almost right on that. And so that too is indicative of the declining debt and the increasing amount of our revenues. So I think overall, compared to the low risk indicators the province puts out, we are in a healthy financial position. Does that help?
Yeah, well, that, and then I guess the sustainability and flexibility and vulnerability section as well, and some of the percentages and ratios there.
Yeah. So again, I think, when we look at vulnerability, that is the government transfers in relationship to where we're going. And we've been fairly constant. That largely probably has to do with the nature of our grants, which would be federal gas tax funding, OSIF funding, OMPF allocations. That number being lower is a good thing because when the government changes its funding formula, that is whether you are at more risk to have a tax increase or not. We worry about that. I worry about that sometimes in the upper tier sector because of the funding that's required for the required services. So we are insulated from that in the regard that we don't have that direct funding. Are we completely insulated? No, because we have to pick up our share should that really change. But overall, when we look at that number, if there was a great change in that structure, we would be able to ride that out with our reserves, but more importantly, we'd have the ability to react in a measured manner to any tax changes or change in user fees versus taxes.
Great. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I want to thank Lori and Carol for coming. Terrific presentation. I guess one thing I was thinking about while we were talking was inflation, and this year coming may be a challenge for us in terms of that. And I know we're not alone. And what I was thinking was, how are we positioned in terms of deal with that? And you do a lot of different municipalities in Eastern Ontario, I know. And how are we positioned to deal with inflation going forward?
Do you want me to take that one, Lori? Or?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll pass it over to Carol again, and I'm just going to flip through to some of the ratios here in our deck. But go ahead, Carol. Thank you.
So I think in that regards, the first thing that you have in your toolkit is the fact that you have some reserves and that you can weather any small increase. The second thing is a good asset management plan. Right now, we are seeing different municipalities, and that they had their construction budget set, and often the construction budget has a clause in it that relates to fuel costs. So there's a fuel adjustment factor. So we have some reserves to pull on in that. A good long-range plan or asset management plan does allow us some flexibility to move projects off should we need to move some of them off till we see, is this a lasting impact for inflation? Or are we going to see, we know it's been a dramatic impact in the last 2 years, and I guess it's seeing where it rides as we see the rising interest rates, and does that start to mediate it? But your toolkit includes reserves. The other thing in a short-term measure, which I think your toolkit includes, is that you do very good in-year budget monitoring. And so when we're often there for the interim, we're chatting about that, and council is already responding to any changing circumstances, looking at council and management. Management plays a big role in this as well. Looking at what could be in-year changes to mitigate any negative impact and to take advantage of any positive impact so that you can, have additional projects come on or defer any. Does that answer that question?
Yes, yeah, that's great. And I'm glad that you pointed that out for everyone watching. So if there's no more questions from anyone, thank you, ladies. Terrific presentation. And I knew it was going to be a good report card, but pleased to see how good it was. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next year. And I'll look to the clerk. I think we're going to do a resolution probably next council meeting to accept this.
Great.
Yes, actually, at this point in time, it will need to be added as a priority issue for that direction from council,
Okay.
and then a resolution will come forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for
your
coming.
time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.
So,
We'll move on.
Chair Brennan, with
Yes.
that, council can choose to add that tonight for direction, or we are going to have a special committee of the whole next week to give that direction. So whatever council wishes to do.
Yeah, I would propose to do it next week.
Okay.
Everyone okay with that? Yes. We have no adoption of minutes. I understand there's a couple of director supports, and I'll ask CEO Morris to segue us into those reports. CEO Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 3 verbal director reports this evening, and we'll start off with Director McMunn.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Sorry you can't, oh, there, my video just popped up. Good evening. The director report I have this evening is respect to the 2022 municipal line painting contract. So I think in a typical year, you would see the line painting already have been completed by this point in July. The reason works haven't been completed yet, we've had some challenges with weather with our contractor. It is the same contractor that we've had for the last number of years, Line and Signs Incorporated. They've had some challenges as well with breakdowns and sourcing materials, specifically paint, road paint. So it's a case of it is what it is. We are under contract with them, and when we extended our contract from last year into 2022, I did afford them about a month's extension, not to be completed in June, but to be completed in the end of July. We did follow up with them today. They're currently working in Petawawa, and I understand that we're next on their list. And they've noted that contingent on Mother Nature cooperating and they can get finished up in Petawawa, they expect to be here late next week or early the following week. So that's my update. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any questions for the director? Seeing none. The next one.
Okay, our next one is from Deputy Clerk Nadine Bennett.
So this is actually just further to the last point that I made to council. So next week, we are going to have a special committee of the whole meeting prior to council. And staff have proposed canceling the weeks of August 8th and August 15th. So those meetings will be canceled. So again, we'll have a special committee of the whole and council next week. And then the meetings on the 8th and the 15th will both be canceled.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Okay. The last one.
Mr. Chair, I want to talk a little bit about an award the town received recently, and it was an award from the Transportation Association of Canada. So it's a cross-country award organization that awards innovative works on the part of municipalities. So this year we won the Small Municipal Achievement Award. We were notified back in May, the middle of May, and issued a press release. The reason I'm bringing it up tonight is the award ceremony was last Thursday, and I had the privilege of participating virtually in that award ceremony. And Vanessa Bernicke was there as well. She and our consultant presented our very innovative Complete Streets project on Beckwith. And obviously it was well received. We won. But I want to point out the other finalists. There were many nominations and it came down to 2. The other finalist was the town of Banff. And I just want to give you some perspective about what we were up against. The town of Banff revitalized Bear Street in downtown Banff. It runs parallel to Banff Avenue, if you've been there. Very much a commercial area in the downtown. They removed traffic, most traffic from the street. They removed parking, on-street parking, took out the asphalt, created this interlocking stone look street, and essentially made it into this pedestrian-friendly commercial hub. And it's got a very much a European plaza vibe to it. So beautiful project, incredible transformation. And I only bring that up because that was our competition. And they did a remarkable job. So I think the town of Smith Falls can be exceptionally proud about what we've accomplished. And the fact that we won the award over that type of competition, I think is remarkable. So, so kudos to everyone involved in this project and our consultant and contractor, and of course for council for providing the direction to revitalize Beckwith Street. And it's getting better. Phase 2 is underway, as everyone knows. It's on track, and we should have a fully completed revitalized Beckwith Street before October. So it's a proud moment for the town of Smith Falls, and I think it's very much consistent with our history of innovation and being a leader. And to beat Banff, I think is outstanding. So thanks to all for making it happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. Any comments on that? Okay, thank you, CO Morris. We have one correspondence item. It's a letter from the Municipal Engineers Association from June 13th. And it's about the retention of professional engineers in Ontario municipalities. For information, I trust everyone read it. And it's for information saying how great engineers are in municipalities. So that will be acknowledged, of course. Okay, we've got 2 in-camera items, and I'll entertain a motion to move in camera. Councillor Allen, second by Councillor Dwyer, all in favor? Okay, we'll be in camera. I don't think this is going to take too long, folks, so hang in there. We'll be back in a minute or 2.
Okay, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to make sure we have all council back. We're missing actually Councillor Brennan and Councillor Alfred. Perfect. Okay, Mr. Chair, it appears that
Back
we
live. And we're back live. So thank you for your patience. Committee had two in-camera issues. The first one was to discuss a litigation matter, and staff are given direction on that. The second was a personal issue about an identifiable individual, and again, staff were given direction on that issue as well. So that are the two rises and reports. And now I'm pleased to say that we're going to move to priority items. 8.1 McIntosh Perry Confederation Bridge Report. I've been waiting for years and years for this report, and I'm excited to listen to Director McMunn, and he's going to introduce a couple of guests that we have this evening as well. So I'll leave it over to Director McMunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so the report we have in front of you this evening is with respect to Confederation Bridge, specifically to make council aware of the notice of study completion and to prevent the preferred alternative, as well as present the preliminary design. So I'm just going to take a second, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to read the three recommendations because there are three of them this evening the council will have to consider. The first recommendation is the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Smith Falls directs staff to publish the notice of study completion for the municipal class environmental assessment, the municipal class environmental study in accordance with requirements of the Environmental Assessment Act. So that's number one. The second recommendation this evening is for council to consider endorsement for the preferred alternative number 4, which is the replacement of the Confederation Drive River crossing with a new vehicular and/or pedestrian bridge under the municipal class environmental assessment study. And the third is that council provide direction on the preferred design option, being replacement of Confederation Drive River crossing with a 2-span truss vehicular bridge with pedestrian platform, which is option number 1 in the report, or solely as a pedestrian bridge, which is option number 2. So with that, I will introduce our guests here in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to go through a couple of high-level points within the report, and then we'll get to the presentation. And the reason I'm keeping it high level, a lot of what I have in the report, Lisa from McIntosh Perry has in her presentation. So she can probably articulate a lot of it much better than I can. So as council is aware, McIntosh Perry was previously awarded the assignment to complete the municipal class EA for the Confederation Bridge in town. The notice of study commencement was advertised on January 20th of 2022, which marked the start of the consultation process. So as we know with municipal class EA, I mean, we get into the technicalities of whatever the assignment is. In this case, it's a bridge discussion, but there is a great deal of consultation that needs to take place with different agencies and perhaps maybe more importantly with the public within the community to get an appetite for what they can consider to be the right approach for the bridge in our case. So agencies such as Parks Canada, RVCA, which is the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, the MECP, Ministry of Conservation, Environment and Parks, Indigenous communities, and the public were consulted. An online public information center, what we know as a PIC, was hosted between the period of May 26th and June 23rd of this year, again, to engage the public to get a sense of what the community wants for this river crossing. And Lisa Marshall from McIntosh Perry will present those findings of the Public Information Center. If we go back to April 25th of 2022, we did present a scope change proposal to council for consideration from McIntosh Perry to perform a detailed inspection of the bridge. At that time, council decided not to consider rehabilitation of the existing bridge due to severe deterioration of structural steel elements. So this removed the alternative solution being rehabilitation from the mix. And we'll also consider that in McIntosh Perry's presentation this evening. I think council at that point in time were, made aware, if they weren't already aware of the severe deterioration in the bridge. And historically, over the last number of years, we've had a number of, different assignments for this structure. So I think at that point, it wasn't really a big surprise that the bridge has kind of served its purpose over the last 100 and some odd years. And rehabilitation just isn't the most financially viable solution. And it doesn't afford us the bridge that's going to stand the test of time. Rehabilitation of a lot of the elements would have prolonged the use of the bridge perhaps for about 5 years past the date of rehabilitation. Within this assignment, McIntosh Perry have completed 2 general arrangement drawings for council's consideration this evening. The first one is a 2-span vehicular bridge with cantilevered sidewalk, and the second is a 2-span pedestrian bridge for active transportation. People can walk across the bridge, they can use bikes, they can use whatever active transportation means they feel appropriate to get across the river into Confederation Park. The 2 general arrangement drawings are preliminary in nature. They're not to be considered a detailed design. They're basically to give you a representation of what the bridge could look like in plan and profile view. Plan view is from the top, profile view is from the side. And they're basically there to kind of illustrate the difference between those 2 options. Detailed design, of course, which presumably we'll get to at some point, will be obviously much more detailed. So there were a couple of other assignments for McIntosh Perry that came out of this municipal Class EA. One was to address the level of service improvements over at the Abbott and Lombard Street intersection, which were completed last year. There was some timing optimization of that intersection and a right turning lane on Abbott Street as you head south. And those are all those findings are documented in the attachments to the report this evening. I guess in a nutshell, the level of service assignment that McIntosh Perry conducted through their traffic division did suggest that the level of service did improve within the intersection, albeit it wasn't necessarily respective of the swing bridge operation. Coincidentally, the day that they were doing the traffic analysis study or the traffic counts, the bridge was activated twice during a 6-hour period, and there were excessive queues on the north side of the bridge. I think in the tune of about 300 meters north of the structure. And in my report, I do talk to different mitigating measures that Ainley Group had touched on back in 2016 that could be incorporated to maybe perhaps not alleviate the traffic, but give people a forewarning that the bridge is swung, and that would be via digital message boards prior to making the commitment to go down William Street to perhaps maybe have to wait for the swing bridge. The last thing that I wanted to draw to council's attention, and I apologize, it wasn't in the staff report, but I just wanted to make mention of one of the guiding documents that the town has that has been used on multiple assignments within Smiths Falls to inform decisions, and that is the Downtown Revitalization and Waterfront Integration Master Plan. That plan in itself, and I'm just going to read you a couple of excerpts because I think it's important to note when we're considering making decisions on what's going to become of this river crossing. The one is that the Rideau Canal and Waterfront Greenway concept focuses on developing continuous pedestrian connections along the water's edge, linking key waterfront features with the street network and the downtown core in particular, providing safe and comfortable space for various types of recreation along the canal is the key objective for the concept plan. Then they go on to talk about Centennial Park, and they say that the concept plan for Centennial Park envisions the closure of a portion of Confederation Drive, specifically between Beckwith Street and Park Street, as well as a portion of Old Mill Road between Confederation Drive and Strathcona, should it be extended to Old Mill Road. So I just wanted to make those points. I think it's important to understand that going back as far as 2013, when this guiding document was prepared, it was respective of you know, what was being considered or looked at or envisioned for Confederation Park, you know, almost a decade ago. So I think that's important to note here this evening. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let Lisa go through her presentation. She can, hopefully Nadine, she can share her screen if she has any trouble. There we go, good. And so we got Lisa Marshall. She's a professional engineer from McIntosh Perry, and her colleague Ghassan Zanzul. Ghassan is a structural engineer with McIntosh Perry, and they're both here to present their hard work from the Municipal Class EA to help inform some decisions here this evening.
Perfect.
The floor is yours, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So before I start, just I'm going to turn off my video just so that sometimes I have internet connections, but hopefully everybody can see my screen right now. And we'll just start stepping through. As Paul indicated, there might be a couple of things that overlap, you know, with his report and what's identified in here. So I will try to, maybe in a couple areas, I might skim over a couple of things as he's already presented some of the information, albeit being probably the first slide and what our outcome of this evening and the purpose of this meeting or presentation is tonight and what we're looking for. So these were the three bullets that Paul just went through and our expectations and looking for endorsement into the project this evening. So then the next slide. So the Confederation Drive River Crossing Study had been carried out as a Schedule B class environmental assessment in accordance with the Environmental Assessment Act. So what that means is for Schedule B is we complete the first two phases of this table. The first phase is identifying the problem and opportunity statement. And then the second phase is identifies and evaluates the potential alternative solutions to address that problem statement. For this assignment, we are currently in phase 2. At the very end of that table, you'll see where it says we are here. So select the preferred solution. Once we receive endorsement on the preferred solution, we'll be looking to go to the notice of completion, which puts us sort of in that middle bracket and allows us to do put the project file on public record for 30 days. And then at the end of that 30 days, finalize that report and then allow the town to proceed to detailed design and implementation. So as per phase 1, the following problem opportunity statement was developed to define the scope of the project. So Confederation Drive River Crossing is in advanced state of deterioration and has been closed to the public use at this time. The existing bridge is a single lane with functional and operational deficiencies. Therefore, the town of Smith Falls has an opportunity to identify and evaluate alternative solutions and determine a preferred solution in accordance with the EA process. So during this first phase, when we develop this proper opportunity statement, it gives us the framework for moving forward and how we're going to evaluate our various alternatives. So in order to address the problem statement, the following preliminary alternative solutions were developed and evaluated. So alternative 1 was do nothing. So through the Municipal Class EA process, this alternative acts as a benchmark for other alternative solutions. Alternative 2 was removal of the existing bridge and provide a new turnaround areas on either side of the river crossing. This alternative would consist of not reinstating the existing bridge. Alternative 3 was rehabilitate the existing bridge to meet engineering and public safety standards and reinstate as a vehicle crossing or pedestrian bridge. And then alternative 4 is remove the existing Confederation Drive river crossing and replace with a new vehicle and or pedestrian bridge. In order to help identify the existing conditions with the study area and help with the evaluation of the alternatives, we completed a number of studies. So the first one was a terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem review of the study area. Then we looked at the social economic environment, so through public consultation, as well as what the land uses were within the area, within the study area adjacent to and around. We also did a detailed desktop review of the existing structural evaluation reports. As Paul mentioned, we also looked at some traffic impact assessment at the study area, as well as the additional study that we completed at Lombard and Abbott. We also did a stage 1 archaeological assessment and a cultural heritage evaluation report and a cultural heritage impact assessment report. So as Paul indicated previously as well, the consultation is a very key component as we go through a Schedule B project. As such, consultation was completed throughout the assignment to present the project information, solicit input, and identify any concerns, which were then used to identify and recommend the technically preferred alternative. So our first step was the Notice of Commencement, which was issued on January 20th. At the beginning of the assignment, we, along with the town, prepared a project contact list, which identified, all staff members, agencies, stakeholders, Indigenous communities, and the public that needed to be consulted through the process. We also consulted with Indigenous communities and key stakeholders. So one of them was First Nations, was one of the big ones that we consulted with at the beginning, as well as Parks Canada, Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, and the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. We also had our Municipal Heritage Committee meeting on February 2nd. The committee summarized the historical significance of the bridge and the Municipal Class EA needs to take into consideration the historical value of the bridge, but also the surrounding land use. The Committee of Whole meeting took place on April 28th, seeking direction from council with respect to undertaking structural steel close-up inspection and structural evaluation of the existing bridge to help further the evaluation and the potential for rehabilitation. An online presentation took place, or public information center, sorry, on May 26th to June 23rd, presented the Municipal Class A study, evaluation of the alternatives, and identified the recommended technically preferred alternative. And therefore it gave an opportunity for the public and agencies and stakeholders all to voice their opinions throughout the EA process and help us come up with that preferred alternative. And then that lands us here tonight, the Committee of Whole meeting on July 25th, where we're looking for endorsement into the project. So just to summarize some of the findings through the online public information center, during the 30-day online PIC, the project team received 5 formal comments. They were from Parks Canada, Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, Public Service and Procurement Canada, Algonquin of Pickawon, Canakin, I think, sorry, I apologize if I mispronounced that, and 1 member of the public. We also received over, I think, about 100 posts on Speak Up Smith Falls, Have Your Say, as well as Facebook. So there was a number of comments on that one that went from various attributes. The main concerns voiced during the PIC from the public was enough time had elapsed and a decision needs to be made. That was sort of the key echoing sound. Now, when it came down to what the public was looking for and what needed to be put back in place, there was sort of a general consensus from the community that they would like to see the bridge reopened. And that spanned from whether we were going to restore the existing bridge to original use and design to accommodate the vehicle and pedestrian, as well as maintain the historical value. They also voiced that they'd like to see the bridge replaced with an existing bridge with a new bridge to accommodate vehicles, pedestrians, and cycle. There was also responses saying they would like to see the bridge solely replaced as a pedestrian bridge. And then there was a few other comments that we received with respect to the traffic and speed concerns around the study area. So as you can see, there was a couple, I just did a couple of excerpts here just to get a sort of flavor of what was posted on Facebook as well as Speak Up Smith Falls. So one was the bridges, one of my many historic bridges in the town of Smith Falls, and needs to be restored to its original status as a single use light vehicle and pedestrian bridge. Another one voiced a new bridge with 1 lane for vehicle and a lane for walking cyclists, keep the original look, 1 lane, slow up traffic, worked well for many years. Another one voiced a footbridge would be really nice as long as it's keeping in with the heritage look. And then the other ones on the other side echoed the same thing as well. One of the comments echoed that, you know, they want to see the bridge reinstated as a vehicle pedestrian, and that they use the area quite frequently, but they hate biking right now with their kids along that pathway that is right next to the locks at this point in time, because there's no railing and it's not a proper walkway. So based on the comprehensive analysis of the alternative solutions considered and all alternatives address the problem opportunity statement for the project, except for alternative 1, which is do nothing. So at this time, the recommended technically preferred alternative is number 4, replace with a new vehicle and pedestrian crossing. The key benefits with this, it provides the best balance benefit from a structural, transportation, operation, and technical perspective, as well as a minimal impacts to the natural environment. It reinstates connectivity for vehicles and or pedestrian traffic along Confederation Drive and Canal Street over the Rideau River, which would be beneficial also for the redevelopment of the former water treatment plant and surrounding lands. Low engineering risks, as the bridge components would be new and anticipate extension of service life as approximately 75 years. Provides an active transportation route that takes advantage of historical landmarkers and scenic areas in the town of Smith Falls. From a cultural heritage perspective, it would mean a loss of a rare 2-span Oran Pony Truss bridge. Ways to mitigate impacts to the cultural heritage value would be through compensation, bridge conservation mitigation measures, which could be sympathetic design, so replicate or cloning, prepare a cultural heritage resource document, or a commemorative plaque. There's a few others as well, but those are sort of the key main ones to look at. We recommend that the Municipal Heritage Committee be involved in reviewing and preparing the mitigation for the heritage considerations as you move forward into the detailed design of the new bridge. So the preliminary design portion of it, a series of bridges replacement alternatives were looked at, including various structure types, were considered and reviewed for feasibility. The following list is the ones that we looked at. So alternative 1, a 2-span truss vertical vehicle bridge with pedestrian platform. This is a cloning option. Alternative 2, a 2-span truss pedestrian bridge, also another cloning option. Alternative 3, 2-span steel girder vehicle bridge with pedestrian platform. And alternative 4, a single-span pony truss pedestrian bridge. So the costing that was put out, and this is very preliminary costing, as Paul indicated, you know, the designs are still very conceptual, but the costing for alternative 1 would be in a range of 2.4 million, alternative 2, 1.2 million, alternative 3, 3.25 million, and alternative 4, 1.55 million. So through the evaluation of the various alternatives, it was recommended that the town consider alternative 1, the 2-span truss vehicle bridge and pedestrian platform, or alternative 2, the 2-span truss platform or pedestrian bridge, sorry. The key benefits are both alternatives allow for a similar style to the existing structure to help preserve the historical value within the community, as well as blend in with the adjacent historical sites. So Rideau Canal World Heritage Site and the National Heritage Site of Canada. Alternative 1 has the lowest cost among the alternatives that provide a pathway for both vehicles and pedestrians, with alternative has the lowest cost compared to all the alternatives for pedestrian use. Both alternatives have a shorter construction duration than the other alternatives, with alternative 2 being the shortest, and both alternatives have more durable compared to the other alternatives. So moving forward, some design considerations that need to be taken into consideration when we go into the detailed design is the couple of additional studies will need to be undertaken, geotechnical investigation from the foundations and pavements, potential additional archaeological. The stage 1 archaeological noted an existing old structure in the Parks Canada land, which is buried. So if we come in close proximity to that, I think it's a 5-meter buffer, there is the potential that a stage 2 would need to be done for it. The marine archaeological is a newer one that has come to fruition. Is when, you know, if you're doing any in-water work, sometimes they mandate that a marine archaeological needs to be done. This one has been a bit of hit or miss with the EAs we've gone through recently. But in the location of the bridge being between the two dams, I don't anticipate, huge artifacts being remaining in place, but it is a potential that it may be required. Hydraulic analysis, and then the pier and abutment investigation. Roadway geometry works will need to be looked at depending on the preferred design alternative. Relocation of the municipal water main to the new structure. Ongoing agency consultation and approvals. So we know at this time, Parks Canada, RVCA, and Municipal Class EA would most likely require permitting. Parks Canada has their impact assessment that they do as well. And this EA will form part of that as it continues on until getting the permitting process through. As well as consultation with the Municipal Heritage Committee during the detailed design and determining the bridge conservation and mitigation measures. So looking at it, the next step, so tonight we're presenting to the committee of the whole to get endorsement into the preferred alternative and to the preliminary design. And then the next step will be to file the project file for 30 days, which we're looking to do from August 4th to September, pending endorsement. Town final receipt of documents would be beginning of September. That's tentative based on when we get the notice of completion out. And then project completion would be September 16th. So once we get the 30-day following any comments received, if there's no outstanding comments or anything to address, we sort of finalize the report based on anything we received during that 30-day review period. And then the project proceeds to detailed design and construction. And that timing is all dependent on funding and approvals. And so that sort of sums it up. So I thank you for your time and open up to any comments or questions.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. If you could stop sharing your screen, or Paul, do you have something to add?
Sure, I'll try and do that. 1 second.
Okay.
How do I stop sharing? 1 second. Where do I stop sharing?
I don't know.
1 second. I'm used to
No
Teams.
problem.
Just click on
It's
the
just
share
so guys
screen,
can see
same
everybody.
button, I think.
Yeah.
It should be right at the top. I think you should have a bar there that shows.
Stop sharing. Thank you. I
Thank you.
apologize. I'm used to Teams.
No worries.
I apologize.
No worries. Okay, so I'm sure I've got gonna have some hands up here, and I'm certainly have one up at some point. Peter, I saw you first, and then Nikki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the report and the presentation. Two things that I agree with, just so we get it off the works. I agree in support publishing the notice of study completion, and I agree with number 4 being the general options. And then I had a couple of questions, if that's all right. One was the Parks Canada approval on page 22. Do you have an estimate of how long that process takes? And is there any risk to this project that we're aware of at this time for the parks might say no and take us in another direction altogether? And then I have a second question, which I'll leave that one out there.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. So we have been in contact with Parks Canada. They did request, so when we went out to the Public Information Center, we provided them all our information, and they requested also to see a copy of the Heritage Impact Assessment. So they are currently reviewing that. I have followed up with them. They were supposed to have comments back to us or recommendations. I haven't received those at this time, so I will follow up again. Based on our previous consultation with them, I don't foresee any roadblocks. How the process works for the impact assessment for them, there's various levels. The basic one should follow, and our information within our project file report should meet the requirements of that basic impact assessment. So as long as they don't deem that there's any significant impact to the dams or any of that features in and around or their lands, it should be quite a smooth process. However, from a time perspective, we won't get that approval until it goes into that detailed design. So you'll still keep working with Parks Canada up until you get your detailed design complete, because they will want to review those drawings, and then they go and issue your permit at that time.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, my other
Yes.
question was, in the public consultation or in the partner consultation, was there any, did it ever come up to, let's say it was a pedestrian and a vehicular bridge that we went with, was there any, did anyone raise the question of reorienting the pedestrian side away from the dam and facing the actual flow of the river? So just turning the bridge around.
Yeah.
Did that come up at all?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, that did not come up at all. We didn't receive any comments. The general comments we received were primarily just, they would like, you know, the resigning consensus is they want to see the bridge reopened, whether it is a pedestrian, a vehicle and pedestrian. That was sort of the main residing cry from the community. But no, nothing with respect to the orientation of the bridge.
And just as a non-engineer, I'm sure it's as simple as when you rehabilitate it and you set the bridge in place, you just, if you wanted to do that, you simply turn it around the other way.
Yeah,
maybe
you
add
just
a
want to
sidewalk.
flip. Yeah, flip
Yeah,
the
just
pedestrian
to flip,
crossing
yeah.
to have it closer to the downtown court. Yeah, for sure.
Okay,
And that's
thank
part
you.
of the detailed design. Yeah.
And I'll save my discussion on which option I prefer until I hear from my colleagues.
For sure.
Thank you. Nikki, you're next.
Thank you. And perhaps, Lisa, thank you for the presentation, but perhaps this is a question better addressed to CA Morris or Treasurer Koziel. You know, looking back at our past 4 years in office, we have been very, very successful at receiving grant funding for large infrastructure works, particularly when it pertains to downtown, but also the intersection upgrades at Lombard and Abbott. And my sense is that we will not have the array of funding options available to us to seek the supplemental financing and funding for this project because it is not physically part of the connecting link. Do you have a sense at this point what sort of grant funding would be available for us if we were going to proceed with this project? Because if we can leverage grant funding, then I think that changes my preferred option. And I appreciate that at this point it would be a gamble. We'd still have to go through the application process, and you know, new provincial government has just taken over. But generally speaking, do you think that there are programs that would be available for this project?
Through the chair, yeah, that's a great question. I'm not aware of any off the top, but what I can say, the trend recently is certainly anything to do with climate change protection and post-COVID recovery, particularly providing opportunities for people to meet and gather outside, have been very popular. And really are the theme that we're seeing. So I'm not aware of any yet. We have been, you know, quite successful with, in the most recent past, bearing in mind that all of those projects were critical infrastructure. So I think this one, I think, would be a little more challenging. We do have formula-based funding that the town receives that could potentially be applied to this project. Council just needs to be aware, if we apply it to this project, we're not applying it to another project, and we have an abundance of projects ahead of us. So it really is a matter of where the priorities lie. But I think you prompted us to have another look at the funding landscape to see if there's anything that might align with this. I think the one key feature that would probably make it more attractive from a funding point of view would be the pedestrian feature. Whether it's solely a pedestrian bridge or combined with vehicular, I think that would be the linchpin to open up funding opportunities, but we can certainly have a look.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more general statement, and then I too will reserve final comments until all of council has an opportunity to provide them. But I think my highest priority on this project, and I think it's a sentiment that at least two of my fellow councillors share, is that there's value in having a structure here, particularly if it is a structure that clones the existing, because there is such a significant history associated with the bridge and with the connectivity between industrial sites that would have been on Confederation Drive and Jason Island. And I think, opportunities and limitations aside with that archaeological site, I think this provides a great opportunity for us to kind of expand on our industrial history around the site and wherever possible to capitalize on it. And I think the history of this Pony Trust Bridge and the significance that it plays within the waterway needs to be the top consideration when we discuss replacement, whether or not it's for a single pedestrian access or vehicular access. I think in my mind that the cloning options are the only two that I'm interested in discussing. And it sounds like those are the two recommendations that Lisa has put forward anyways. So I appreciate that. I'm glad that those are the options that are at the forefront.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Panko, you're next.
Thank you. Obviously, this is something that's been simmering for, I guess, probably 3 councils now. I'm glad we're getting closer to a decision on it. I agree with the recommendation of publishing notice of completion. That's a given, and I also agree that we want to move ahead with preferred alternative number 4. And I too am not sure exactly what that should look like. And when I look at it, I mean, I know this bridge has really strong sentimental, historical significance to the community. And so I agree with Councillor Dwyer's comments that something that would be as close to a replication as possible would be a preferred option, as long as the cost was not considerably higher than an alternative cost for a similar type of crossing. I mean, when I look at the factors that affect my decision making will be safety, and I agree. Like right now, we see people crossing at the canal, and one evening I watched a couple parents with a couple of kids on bicycles sort of cutting through that parking lot and heading across the concrete dock along there, or wall along there, and you just cringe at the thought of a child turning to the side of it and ending up in the water. And so I think we have a fundamental responsibility to make sure that we have a safe crossing there. That has to be paramount in our decision making. It's a matter of convenience, I mean, it's convenient crossing for pedestrians and cyclists. Also, like, it's a matter of convenience for motorists, and then we lead to cost. And we know that, I mean, I think the estimate was $300,000 simply to remove what is there. So it's a significant cost just to deal with the existing structure that has to be removed from there. And when we're looking at that cost, we know that there's a lot of unknowns here. It could be quite a range from pricing for all the options, the 2 options. And then in addition to that, we don't know the state of condition for the abutments. And we don't know how much work, and I got, Lisa, that may be a question for yourself as to how much of a bearing that may have in the actual final cost of removing the bridge and putting something there for the next 75 years. And then, has been mentioned, the priority for capital investment. And if we're going to commit $1.5 million or 2 million or 3 million or potentially more to this, then what other priorities, I assume, that sit in our current asset management plan end up being pushed back, and what's the potential impact of that? So I think with my colleagues, I think it's a tough decision to make in isolation when we know that whatever investment we make here will have a significant impact on other things that we can do. And at the same time, as to CEO Morse's comment, I mean, I'm not confident there's a lot of grant opportunities out there. if something comes along for active transportation, I think, yeah, that might be a linchpin towards getting some funding for it. But when it comes to being just simply a river crossing that the town has functioned quite well with without now for 7 years. We know the improvements at Abbott and Lombard have made significant improvements in transportation flows. And putting this vehicular bridge back in here is not going to make a meaningful change in how long it takes people to get around town. And then finally, the piece I don't think we've discussed very much, but the possibility that if we do end up putting a vehicular bridge here, what's the probability of having to put a signalized intersection on Confederation and Beckwith? And then what's that impact from a cost and also from a traffic flows across Beckwith and through town, where of course there are heaviest flows. So I'm interested in again hearing from my colleagues, but I think I can't see myself coming to a conclusion on this tonight when in isolation of all the other factors.
Okay, thank you. Lorraine? You're muted, Lorraine.
My
There you go.
colleagues have alluded to this. We've been dealing with this 3 terms of council. For me, this is the 12th year. And I ran 12 years ago because the bridge was one of the things at the top of my list that I really wanted to have some kind of impact on bringing it back. My option that I would choose certainly would be to make it as much of a clone of the bridge, but just in better condition. And then I think it should be part of our asset management plan to make sure that we look after it because, like 12 years ago when this started, I know, and since then when we've had reports come to us, it showed that, if we had put the money we needed to repair it as it was aging, we might still have got a longer life. And so I think any bridge that we put there, it's got to be part of our asset plan to continue to look after it and continue to have it safe. The fact that it's going to be a truss vehicular bridge with a pedestrian platform, to me, that's going to look most like what was there before. And that's certainly what the Municipal Heritage Committee wanted, loud and clear. They actually would have liked to just fix the old one, but I know that's not possible. And I don't know about Councilor McKenna's idea, but when I was growing up, the bridge was the way it is now with the pedestrian on the right-hand side as you're going across from the park. And we used to stand along there and the spray from the falls would spray us. And it's one of the greatest memories that when I chat with people who grew up here, talk about. So I don't think I'd want the pedestrian side on the other side. That's just, those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Anybody, Chris, do you want me, and then Chris, and then Wendy, and then me?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks everybody for this tonight. I had a hard time with the Class CA. I found it was difficult to follow and get through, and I don't know that I have enough information to echo Mayor Panko's comments to really get behind an option tonight. The Class CA is making a recommendation without a cost benefit analysis, without the business case for this structure. This option 4 is committing to multi-million-dollar investment without looking at the abutments yet. And I don't know, it's not making a clear recommendation on vehicle or pedestrian. I don't have the information from the report. I need to feel confident in making a decision right now. So for that reason, I'd be option 2 is the most that I've got. We know we need to get rid of what's there. We know that it can't be rehabilitated anymore, and we know that it looks awful. So from the information provided, that's all it can get me to. I'd love to take option 4 and get into a design option, but Mayor Panko outlined all the information that's missing to be able to make an informed decision there. So that's where I'm at with it right now.
So yeah, just to be clear, option 2, just refresh, that's to remove or just to do nothing? Remove
and clean up the area, and we can keep figuring this out in time.
Okay, so noted. Councillor Alfred.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first 2 recommendations direct staff for the notice of study completion. I support, and I further support that council support the preferred option number 4 replacement with either a new vehicle and or pedestrian bridge under the municipal class environment study. With regard to whether it's a vehicular / pedestrian or pedestrian only, for me, this report, all 700 and nearly 80 pages of it, makes the case against vehicles for over the course of this bridge lasting for another 50 years. If you've read it, and you all have, I know, there was not the traffic. Once we talk about signalization on Beckwith Street, I'm definitely not. This does, as Paul pointed out, and even without that 2013 downtown and waterfront master plan, the way to connect that bridge to that crossing to the downtown is over that water, in terms of a pedestrian bridge. I can find no business case, and I have similar wonderful memories of that bridge, and I hope that in the design that it echoes what the old one used to look like. But I find no business case for anything but a pedestrian bridge in all of that we've read, and I appreciate that finally I feel like we have a lot of information in one place instead of over the course of our term, and obviously previous terms we were getting it sort of piecemeal. So I'm certainly, I know there's more work to do. I know there's an abutment assessment, but I also know that the least expensive option is going to be a pedestrian, no matter where we land, making a decision now. And that we won't be the ones budgeting it. That will be a future council. So they will have to decide where they put it in terms of priority and the cost. And that by that time, hopefully they will be ready to have actual numbers that they can. But for me, I can't, it reinforced for me that for the long term, for our community to connect the paths, connect downtown, and it doesn't make any measurable difference in the traffic flow in the study area, or now that Abbott's been improved, and that there is warnings for you ahead of time that bridge is swung. I can find no business case to do more than a pedestrian bridge. So that's where I am right now.
Okay, so I'm gonna take a shot at it. Of course, you know I'm gonna. I guess the question I had that you, Lisa, you talked about the speak up in the public, and you had 100 responses, and you put some typical ones. Did you have that broken down in terms of yay or nay for one way or the other?
No, I didn't break it down from a yay nay column of pros and cons. We could look at it further in detail. It was a little tricky. Some were just, Facebook is sort of a platform where people
I know
sometimes, so it was hard to decipher between them sometimes. But yes, that was the general consensus, like I said, was the public wants to see the bridge reopened.
Yeah, so that would be number 2. And the other question I was thinking about it is, if it was a pedestrian, there is Confederation, so there would have to be, there's a parking lot there at Combined Locks. So would that still be in commission then?
The parking lot, sorry, on the southeast side, the Parks Canada one?
Yeah, no, right by the lock station.
Yeah, all parking lots would remain in place, with the pedestrian bridge, because Parks Canada will still have to access their facilities, as well as coming from the other end and coming to Strathcona and everything. Like there's that park in the water tower and the redevelopment. So there will still be access points on either side.
There's one on the one I met was at Confederation Drive. So off of Beckwith, it's very small. There's probably 6 or 7 stalls there.
Yeah.
And I think the lock staff use it.
Yes, correct. Yeah, we wouldn't, in no way would you want to, diminish anybody's operations. And that was one of the things we talked about with Parks Canada,
Right.
And recognizing that they have used the bridge in the past for their operations.
Yeah.
So like I said, I am still waiting to get their comments back. I have no recommendations, as they put it. I'm curious to what they say, but when I initially talked to them, it didn't stop their operation process right now if it wasn't a vehicle bridge.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. I'm pretty passionate about this, as you know, and I think that from what I've heard from my colleagues, to publish a study, everybody's a thumbs up. To replace the structure, other than Chris, I think has some reservations of that. Is a go. In terms of what it's going to be, I got to say, I'll quote, and Peter will enjoy this, the old Yankees catcher, Yogi Berra. I've got deja vu all over again, because here we are in coming on to August at the end of a term, and we're going to make a major infrastructure decision. I think that, doing option 1 and 2 fulfills the strategic plan commitment we made, is to make a decision, which is to replace the thing. So I think that, I'm not going to hang my hat on a 2013 study that was never debated or voted on by a council. I like to talk to people, and from my mind, people want that bridge replaced after 7 years. It's sort of an embarrassment. So I think that if we can agree to replace that thing, and then I think the next council should decide what it should look like. So those are my comments, and I hope you guys can agree on that. I'm not prepared to be in the minority again, and I think the newly elected council should talk about it, and I think the candidates for council should talk about it, and then we'll go from there. And I mean, funding wise, there is the gas tax that we receive, so there is a funding model there, and it's about priorities. It's about priorities, as Malcolm said. So that's my comments, and if you guys want to debate what it's going to be now, I'm happy to listen to you guys, but I think that if we can agree on option 1 and 2, publish a study, we're going to replace the bridge, and then we're going to defer the decision on what it's going to look like. Councillor Alfred.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I think we have enough information, and this bridge has been a thorn in everyone's side since 1984, and council after council after council after council after council has made no decision. And yes, we are at the end of our term, and I said when I was speaking that the next council will decide the priority for it. They will decide if they can swing it financially, but the decision on what to do, I think we would be remiss in not making that decision now. This town has gone around and around of this bridge forever. So is it going to be a pedestrian / vehicle bridge, or is it going to be a pedestrian only bridge? I don't know that we have to wait any more time to make this decision. I think other councils could have made it and didn't. And I don't really think we should be leaving when this has been on our radar. And for you, Sean and Lorraine, it's been on your radar much longer than the last 4 years. So make a decision. The next council will have to figure it out. When I would just go back to your comment about the 2013 downtown and waterfront master plan, it has served this town fairly well. And it was not, we can go back and relitigate that. But the other day we passed a plan. I think it was last council. We passed a plan, and I flagged that without adoption, it is it is a plan and it will show up in staff's recommendations, whether it's adopted or not. So I think this town has been well served by that downtown waterfront and master plan. And I think we will be well served by the plan we passed 2 weeks ago. But to not do anything, to again, not make a decision, I think it's counterproductive. I think we're all frustrated, including all of our constituents, about people who will not make a decision on this bridge.
Thank you, Mayor Panko.
Thank you. And I appreciate all the comments. And I would feel much more comfortable having a staff report on some of the other capital items coming up in the next couple of years. So we know what an investment in this bridge is impacting on other capital items that need to be addressed. And also, I guess, if, as mentioned earlier, maybe Lisa's comments on the abutments, because my concern there is that the price tag for this could escalate quite significantly if we had to do some major rehabilitative work on the abutments, which of course could include in-water work and all of the approvals that would be required for that, the additional cost for that. So just maybe Lisa's professional opinion on maybe at least what the current state of the abutments appears to be, and maybe some experience and insight.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Nikki.
Okay,
Thanks, Mr.
can
Chair.
Lisa answer the, sorry, can Lisa answer the question?
Oh,
Do you want
sorry.
to comment on that, Lisa? Sorry.
Yep, for sure. So with respect to the piers and the abutment, so in the costing, and Gassan can speak better to this as the structural engineer who prepared the costing for it. It's my understanding that in that cost breakdown that the piers and the abutments are priced to be replaced in that report. Where we said with reevaluation of the piers and the abutment comes down to a heritage perspective, looking at maintaining those, that center pier as one of the heritage attributes of the structure. That is a possibility, but we didn't pursue any further evaluations of the structure. So we don't have any information to make those, informed decisions at this time with respect to even costing for rehabilitation. And that's why it was included out of the table, because we can't make those judgment calls without doing further evaluation to know what the rehab cost would be. So the piers and the abutments, if we choose to keep them in place and reuse them or reuse materials from them for saving that attributes of heritage value, that's where the evaluation work would need to come in. For the detailed design, you will need to do geotech investigation for your foundations. And so there are those investigations that would be required for the piers and the abutments, but it comes down to a heritage value for the pier and the abutment if you decide to further do evaluation on those to maintain them.
And if I may follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
For the, I guess, the center pier, if we elected a single span as a pony truss pedestrian, which would not be dependent on support from that center pier, would that have a impact on the need to, I guess, consider this? Does that change the outcome?
Gassan, could I throw that one to you from a structural standpoint?
Yeah, you mean if we elect like the single span pedestrian bridge, that the central pier will not be required. So basically could be removed.
Could be removed or could be preserved simply as a heritage
or
element.
could be just cut down below the soffit of the bridge and leave it there just for the way it look or for the heritage value. Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong, that option though would not provide you with, say, the cloning aspect of option 1 and 2.
Should I? It will not be cloning, of the existing, but it could be also a truss bridge. It's gonna look like truss bridge, but not exactly like 2-span, similar to the existing one. But it could be type of a truss bridge.
So if I just make, I guess, the final question. So the costing that has been provided, do you feel would be fairly inclusive of rehabilitation of the abutments and pier, or there could be some?
The costing we provided included the substructure replacement, like a new substructure, not rehabilitating the existing.
Okay.
Rehabilitating the existing will involve like more investigation of the stone, the mortar, excuse me, taking samples, taking cores from. Also, we need the geotechnical investigation to know what is, in order to assess or evaluate structurally the pier or the abutment. But we could do the evaluation, but still you might not get like the full load for the new structure, like the full highway load or the as per the code. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, our cost including like the new substructure, for, like a new apartment and piers, including the coffer dam for the construction and all kind of things.
Thank you. So I think that does provide, I guess, opens another window if we wanted to preserve the heritage abutments and pier that are there now. We probably need further investigation to even know. So another investment, I guess, in order to know what that potential cost would be. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Nikki.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think like Wendy, I'm ready to make a decision on this tonight. I feel like the municipal EA process has provided us with substantial information to make an informed decision. I can appreciate, Councillor McGuire's concerns about, having some missing elements, but I also think that in this economic climate, things are only going to get more expensive the longer we wait. And at some point, you do just have to be the council responsible for pulling the trigger and making a decision. And so with that in mind, I think I am most comfortable supporting an option that sees both vehicular and pedestrian access reinstated to that site. And I think contextually about what we have going on around that site and the investment that we're looking to be made into the water treatment plant and the number of potential trips being generated from that site, which at this point is a giant unknown. But I don't want to see us limit our development potential of that site by not having an additional vehicular access to the site. And I think, like Lorraine said, if the structure was designed in such a way that it was only a pedestrian access, the scale of that structure is not going to be consistent with the feel and look of what we have today. And I think if we were simply going to construct a pedestrian access from one side of the river to the other, that without having a more substantial massing, it's really no different than any other pedestrian bridge we have in town. And I think at that point, we could do it for significantly less and do away with the concept of putting a bridge in place that does emulate what has historically been there. So with that in mind, I think at this point, I feel comfortable making a decision to move forward with vehicular and pedestrian access. I hear Peter's point about switching the sidewalk from one side to the other. Like Lorraine, I too have sentimental value with the idea of being misted as I walk over the bridge. But I also do think that from a active transit perspective, it is going to complicate things because I think all the sidewalks are on the side where the bridge is now. So we'd be replacing and reinstating all the sidewalks south side, which, grand scheme of things is a drop in the bucket compared to 3.5 million. But, I do think that there's value in kind of keeping it where it is. And the only other point that I want to raise, and really I want to seek clarity to make sure that I'm not misremembering facts, but when we had this conversation back at the beginning of term 4 years ago, we had discussed the fact that as the bridge is currently designed in width, it could not be used for multi-directional traffic, even if it was stalling. So historically it was, you wait your turn and then you go across, but I understand that MTO will no longer honor that. So when we put this bridge back in place, my understanding is that it will not have that free flow of traffic both ways, that we will have to make another decision about which one way of traffic we are going to see. So while it does have the look and feel of what was there, its function will never be what it was. And I'm hoping somebody can confirm that that is true. If not, even better, if we can have two directionals, that's great.
Okay. I don't know if Paul can shed light on that question or not.
So through the chair, if I understand correctly, the question is if it's effectively one way down Confederation Drive. I'm just looking.
I think the question was if it's a one way, if it's a one lane bridge, the practice was if there's two cars at either end, one car would yield to the other car and then the other car would go across. So would it need to be a one-way bridge only? Or could it be function like that?
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure. Lisa, do you have any context in terms of MTO's requirements for bridge design if
So
it could be yield on one side?
Yeah, I don't have the exact requirements for it. At this time, we have shown the GA to be a two-lane, two-pass structure, two-way, just to meet current safety standards, so the MTO guidelines. So it has been shown as that. If the town decides down the road when they get into the detailed design that they want to continue maintaining it as a single lane, that is something you can discuss at that time and decide to reduce the level of safety, as I understand. In talking to our structural and municipal team, if you could decide to move forward with it going back as a single lane. But right now, to meet the safety standards, we have gone to a two-lane.
Okay, so the design is two-lane.
We have shown it as a two-lane, yes, at this time, just to meet the requirements of the standards.
Okay, thank you. Peter, and then Chris, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, and I appreciate the conversation and the level of expertise that we have with us. So I too was ready to come tonight to make a decision. And I do that for many of the reasons that my colleagues have said. The next council, we've approved capital projects and then deferred them year after year until the money was in place. The library is a good example. It was approved and, we set aside the budget, carried it forward until we were ready. And so that's not unusual. So I'm comfortable with that. I'm also comfortable that down the road, should traffic get diminish or a future council, so I'm leaning, I would like to see it a vehicular and pedestrian bridge. And because I do know that in 10 years, the council of the day could say, you know what, we're going to make this pedestrian bridge now and just for walking but they'll never be able to go back and add a lane for cars in 10 years. So it's easier to go back. Let's say we get to, anyways. So I'm there knowing that there's the business case, as Councillor McGuire's brought up, is not quite there, but the importance and the value of the bridge to our community, I'm ready to make that decision on option to have vehicular and pedestrian traffic bridge built.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Chris.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I'm really concerned with the direction we're taking this. I understand that it's not politically popular to think this out, but and I can't speak for the 12 years, but we just heard our financial report and how our numbers are trending in the right direction, and we patted ourselves on the back of how we're paying down the debt, we're building infrastructure, and now we're making a commitment to spend $3 million without any financial analysis, without any business case. We've got traffic studies that show that this isn't necessary. We have a waterfront revitalization plan that said to extend Strathcona to Mill Road and keep this pedestrian. with this Class EA, we have a design that's been railroaded under a commitment we had from a previous study to get a clone version. The clone version that's being presented now is not a clone version of what we're used to. It's a 2-lane traffic we're hearing. It's got a concrete deck. It's got asphalt on it. It's using abutments that we have no idea what the integrity is going to be. So it's likely we're going to get these ugly concrete piers coming out of the river. There's not enough information here to be throwing this around, and it might make a good quote in the paper, but it's not going to be good policy in the future. So I think we've gone way past where we should be. I'm barely comfortable letting this EA go the way it is with the recommendation it is, because we paid big bucks for this report and there's no recommendation on pedestrian or vehicular. And there's a ton of data that goes into that. And I really wish that we would have had clear direction on that, the same way we had clear direction on Becker Street when it was time to make a decision. So this, I don't even know with the way the heritage attributes have been twisted into a Disneyland fabrication of what we used to have. I'm not even keen on a cloned option. I don't even know if that's our best bet here. So I'm okay with making a decision on 1 or 2, but I think 3 is it's way overdue it's way too early for that without a staff report.
Okay, thank you. And I think we've heard from, unless everybody's gone twice or 3 times. So I'll put one last call out and then I'm going to propose what we do here. Okay. I think that, I'm certainly supportive of vehicles and pedestrians on that bridge. And I've said that over and over and over again. So, and I've got consensus. We've got consensus for that. And so I want to thank, unless someone has another comment, I want to thank Mac Perry for coming and answering our questions. And Wendy does have another comment.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So you're just excusing the consultants because I don't know that.
No, I'm just thanking them.
Probably
I'm not done.
For the conversation.
No, I'm not done. I'm just thanking them for coming, and then I'm going to ask CEO Morris for direction on. I think that we've got a consensus here, and I'll ask CEO Morris our path forward.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next step, aside from getting the Parks Canada comments in, would be detailed design. We don't have funds in 2022 to do that, so the earliest it would happen would be 2023. So on that level, I would submit there is no rush to make the third decision. And I would offer that it is potentially a large expenditure. And my recommendation is to put it in the context of other capital projects. We heard we are trending in the right direction financially, but I want to caution you, we have an enormous amount of infrastructure work that we have yet to do, right? The signals are good, we're going in the right direction, but we have by no means solved our infrastructure deficit. This potential expenditure of $3 million represents a significant capital expenditure. My suggestion to committee is to have staff come back with a more fulsome report of the financial and policy impact of this decision. Because we need to look at the funding as well, just to see if we can offset some of that pressure from the local taxpayer. But $3 million, that would replace a lot of aging, leaking pipes in the ground. I just want you to put this in context. We have a lot of significant infrastructure ahead of us. Infrastructure that not only, may not be environmentally friendly, but infrastructure that represents a liability to the community. Poor streets, poor sidewalks. I don't want to throw a wet blanket over this, but I'm just saying we have a lot of work ahead of us. My suggestion is put this in context.
Yeah, I agree. And I would suggest also that this actually shovels in the ground is probably 2 years out at a minimum. So, I mean, I've just got direction. The options were before us. committee discussed, I originally suggested that this is an election issue. I was ready to make a decision, as were four of my colleagues, and give our preference, and that's what we got. But yes, certainly bring a staff report back, but this decision for funding is going to come down in the next council. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so Wendy and then Peter.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much everybody's made that clear, Mr. Chair, is that this isn't how, the money that's going to be spent or the priority this bridge will have. Any of that stuff is going to be for future councils. But in terms of making a decision on whether it is intended to be pedestrian / vehicle or pedestrian only, that has been more of the conundrum of this bridge than almost anything else. And once that decision is made, you can better decide, the next council can better decide how much is it going to take. Malcolm's perfectly right, as was Chris. This could turn into 4 million, 5 million. But in my particular, and I see where the wind is blowing, but the pedestrian option is always going to be the least expensive. And it still accomplishes a bunch of the other things that we've had in place for some time. So I still want to make the decision, is it pedestrian vehicle or is it not? It'll be up for the next council to decide the priority of that and whether they've got the budget and so on and so on and so on and so forth. Yeah, but not making a decision is destructive. It has been destructive not having a decision on this bridge.
Well, I think we talked about that in the last few minutes. Peter?
Just, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, CEO Morris, I'm just confused now because we got a report signed off by you and Director McMahon asking us to make these decisions tonight. And then you finish off by telling us, no, it's premature to make the decision tonight. So I went into that reading your report and was ready to make those decisions. So I guess that third decision shouldn't have been in there if we aren't ready to make it or if staff aren't ready to hear it. So I'm confused and a little annoyed by that.
CEO Morris.
Yes, through the chair, I mean, this project was a package, and the purpose of tonight was to incent a dialogue to talk about that package. It wasn't to force a decision tonight. It was meant to talk about where the preferences lie so that we could structure a subsequent report to come back to give you the information you need to make that decision. So from the outset, it was never the intent to necessarily make the full decision. That's council's prerogative. You can do that if you wish. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm saying I'm recommending that you consider all the factors that were brought up this evening, like it's a 2-lane bridge that was considered within this study. That's fundamentally different than what exists. So if the idea is to make it look like it used to, it won't with a two-lane bridge. It won't with a pedestrian bridge. Those are the things I think you need to consider. And how important is it that it look like the former or the existing one in its heyday? And so the idea was to generate some discussion around that. If you want it, if it's important for council to have this new structure look like the old one, that's a 1-lane bridge for vehicles and pedestrians. That's not what's in the recommendation. So we put it on to generate a more fulsome discussion.
Go ahead, Wendy, and then we're going to end this.
We're saying 2-lane, both. It was never. Is it 2-way or 2 lanes? I just want to be clear about that. You could go both ways on our current bridge, but it was only a single lane. So we're not talking about making that a 2-lane bridge. We're just saying you'll still be able to go both ways. Is that correct?
It is single lane bridge. It is, sorry, if I can. It is single lane bridge.
Okay.
Similar to the existing.
Thank you. I just want to be clear that we're saying 2 lanes, but it means we actually mean 2-way.
Okay, Nikki, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to echo what Peter said, which frankly, I texted to CAO Morris around the time that Peter was thinking it. I mean, why we have question 3 on this agenda tonight has just thrown a monkey wrench into the entire conversation. I'm disappointed that we literally just debated this for 45 minutes, came to a decision, and then basically got railroaded about that decision in an open and public forum. I can appreciate that there's more questions that need to be answered. I would like to suggest that council provide some direction to staff to actually bring that back at a set time, because like Peter said, we have the information in front of us. It is our responsibility to make the decision. I think we've all agreed that the decision has gone on too long. I want to report back from staff within 2 weeks. That's my suggestion, because I think this needs to be done.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I apologize. I don't think I've done a very good job. I think we should leave this now. I'll leave it to staff to come back again. And in my mind, I have to agree with Peter and Nikki in a way. I was prepared to defer number 3, but I certainly preferred vehicles and pedestrians, and so you know, I think maybe in the near future, maybe staff could come back and talk about the funding of it and that sort of thing. But we're not even close to a detailed design and all the rest of the hoops that we need to go through. But those parameters, vehicles and pedestrians, should be the basis of that, given the discussion we had tonight. Okay. So. Okay, I'll use some discretion, Wendy, and you can.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, Mr. Chair. So you already have consensus for a single lane bridge with a pedestrian crossing. That is the consensus you have, in spite of how I feel about it. So that should be what comes back to us from staff, is anything, if that's the decision we are in agreement with tonight, that you have consensus for that, then that informs all the next steps.
Yes. That's what I just said. Yeah, go forward on that basis. Okay. I'm going to shut it down, Chris. That's enough. I want to thank Mac Perry for listening to this, and I apologize for all. This is a very emotional issue, as we all know, and but we're going to move on after and now, and there's a long time coming. So. We're going to move on to the next item of the agenda, which is a transfer payment agreement with Director McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the report this evening is with respect to the water tower replacement project. So as council is aware, we did apply for a grant through the federal government through the ICIP Green Stream program. That was announced some time ago that the town was the successful recipient of about $3.6 million towards this project. So this is somewhat a formality. I mean, there's a transfer payment agreement that has been sent to us that needs to be executed by the mayor and clerk, and this report just basically it's asking for council's endorsement to direct the mayor and clerk to sign that transfer payment agreement. And what that'll afford us to do, once we do get a detailed design completed and we get the project tendered, it'll allow us to start reporting through the province to the federal government, reporting to receive those funds in installments. So with that, through the chair, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions from anyone? Who's not going to go thumbs up with that? We'll take the money. And you know, once again, we're very, very good at getting money from the effort here. So we'll keep that in mind going forward as we've been very successful. We'll go on to 8.3, Fair Meadows lifting of 0.3 reserve with Planner Grenke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm I'm bringing for council's consideration a housekeeping matter pertaining to a 1 foot section of Ferreira Drive in between Ferreira Meadows and the Bellamy Farm subdivision. This is a reserve that was put in place at the time of the development of the Ferreira Meadows subdivision, and it was in the past years it was missed having it be lifted, thus formally completing the transportation network. So in response to a request by the developer solicitor, we're proposing that that council pass a bylaw lifting the 1 foot reserve, essentially an administrative matter confirming the streetscape. It does not functionally change anything with the road allowance that exists at present. So that is the recommendation that this bylaw be brought forward at the next available opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? We like the thumbs up, and thank you, Carl. And that will come forward next week, I believe, at council meeting. So thank you for that. That was easy. 8.5 is Robinson Avenue, and C.O. Morris has got some great news for us there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think we forgot, we skipped over an item though.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Yeah.
8.4.
No, but Janet wants to go before you, and I apologize.
That's okay. I'll keep
I'm getting a little punchy. Budget monitoring, which is more good news. So
yes.
Sorry,
so,
Janet. I apologize.
Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm here this evening to give you a high level after completing June's budget monitoring. As indicated in my report, we have an overall surplus of about 87,000. The water and distribution is a bit of a deficit of about 67,000. The wastewater is in a surplus of about 8, and the majority of the surplus is in tax supported about 162,000. The majority of that stems from payroll expenditures reflective of delay in hire vacancies, and our 2021 year-end reconciliation of 2 of our shared services, surplus and ambulance of 63,000 and Lanark Lodge 131,000. So due to our current economic climate, the current CPI average for this year is 6.8. Just to give you a comparison, the overall average in 2021 was 4.2. So staff will continue to monitor and report to council any potential financial impacts this may have on our budget. But as noted in my report, approximately 50% of our budget is payroll related expenditures, which are not affected by this inflation rate. The budget increases are set by multi-year collective agreements, all of which were substantially lower than the current CPI. So with that, I'll pause and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Treasurer. Questions from my colleagues? Yes, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Treasurer Kazil, for the report. I was really keen to see what your thoughts were on the interest rates climbing and continuing to climb, and inflation, which is much higher than 6, I believe, are heading that way. Would you, I know you'll monitor it, and I appreciate that. I know you'll flag it if it becomes an issue, but is your sense is we can buffer this? And do you look any farther than 1 year out? I know you can only do 1 year at a time, but if this trend continues, I would like to think that some large municipalities do a 3-year projection out and start to think about, and certainly when we're doing our capital assets, I can't help but think a longer term view, even with some different scenarios, and just might be informative, in particular to the next council. So I just wondered, I know you don't have a crystal ball and you've nailed it with the staffing costs, but I guess I worry. I'm worried. And I know as long as you're worried with me, I'm okay, but can you look any farther than the next 6 months? Or do you?
We haven't discussed doing multi-year. We will be starting doing the working papers for our next year's budget. And now with it being an election year, that extend out for approval to the end of February. So some of those things will indeed affect the next year's budget. Again, back to payroll is multi-year, so next year's necessarily won't be. They may be in future years. Some of the capital costs, as we know, are coming above budget, and we may have to look at that being an issue for the next year's budget as well. Some of our other costs, insurance, we had already built in a buffer on that. So we came pretty much in on what we budgeted. So that's another high ticket item. And as I've denoted in our utilities, we're in a program through AMO, it's called LES. So some of our rates are lower than what most people would pay. So that has worked out. In some instances, our consumption is over, and that's why they're in a deficit. But in the past, we have gotten rebates. So that might take care of some of that deficit we're seeing right now. But at a later time, we may discuss doing multi-years, but we haven't right now.
If just to follow up, Mr. Chair, if I might I guess if the province is going to feel this and the federal government is feeling it too, and I just wonder if a scenario, you hate to worry about something that might not happen, but is there a contingency or a scenario where if the OSA funding is cut in half or something, are staff taking those scenarios and have some options in mind? I don't need to know what they are, but as long as there's some thinking that way, as a governor of the corporation, I'd be wanting to make sure that you are looking beyond just the next 6 months or year and thinking about the potential. And that holds true. We do it for revenue projections. We are seeing buildings and tax. We understand that better, but anyways, I guess, thanks.
The chair, I can reiterate what the auditor has indicated to us. Our surpluses are definitely in a very good position starting in 2016, and we've come a long way in that short period of time. So our reserve management has become more stringent, that we're following that. So any surpluses are put into reserves. So I do think we have contingencies in place to buffer some of that.
Thank you. And yes, we did get good news from the auditors, and hopefully if economic conditions improve. If they don't, we should be okay, we hope. So thank you for that. Any other questions for Janet? Seeing none. Okay, I'm sorry, Malcolm, but to skip ahead to you again. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Now the good news.
Okay, so the recommendation in this report is to gift a parcel of municipally owned land to Carebridge Community Support. So a little history here. Carebridge are very good at what they do, and that is providing communities, particularly for those that are seeking attainable housing. And of course, we're working on the project at 44 Chambers, which will be 34 residential units. Unfortunately, the need and the demand is still there despite the 34 new units that will be built. So Carebridge supported us to talk about another project. And at the same time, the town ended up vesting or taking ownership of the property at 14 to 30 Robinson Avenue. This was a product of a tax sale. We attempted on 2 occasions to sell it to recover the arrears that were outstanding. Both times were not successful. So we've kind of gone through the process of our disposition of land policy, and we've checked off those boxes. We've declared it surplus. You have declared it surplus. We have an appraisal of the property. So it's now time to talk about the disposition of the property. So it seems like a really good fit with Carebridge to partner on this property. And it should be noted that they are looking at taking the layout and the design of the residential units, or the residential building rather, on Chambers Street and applying it to Robinson with probably a few tweaks. It's a beautiful piece of property. There are nice mature trees on the perimeter. So it may be an ideal location for such a development. So the options that we have in front of you, it's fairly large too, I should say. There's 63 meters of frontage on Robinson. So it provides a lot of opportunity for appropriate design in that area, which is residential already. So the options are to consider gifting the property to Carebridge, which would require a write-off of about $71,000 in arrears associated with the property. The other option is to look at selling the property to Carebridge, And the third option is to not pursue an arrangement with Carebridge. The one that's being proposed, I should say, is a memorandum of understanding. So they would not, if council agrees, agree to transfer title until the planning approvals are in place and they're ready to go. There's a lot of funding to put in place, and Carebridge are masters at weaving together funding for these types of builds. So that will take some time. So the recommendation is to enter negotiations for an MOU, which of course we would bring back to committee and council for endorsement before we enter the MOU. So the direction we're seeking tonight is to begin those negotiations.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. And then Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This piece of property it's been sort of a tragic end to what was there. But I see this as gifting this land to Carebridge to build attainable. We're using a different name for these things now because Carebridge does geared to income, and their tenants will come from the social housing lists of the counties. I see we have been superbly blessed in this town in the last 4 years with our economic growth, with the success of our staff finding funding for some of our big projects. But I and others of my colleagues, when we came on council, wanted to find ways to share this boom with people who are less fortunate than some others. And I think this is an absolutely perfect way to do this. Donate this land to Carebridge so that attainable housing can be built for more of the residents in need of that. I will also say though, with the Carebridge development and with the potential now for the Robinson Avenue, I think the town, and then with also the discussions with RCHS over that land, I think the Smith Falls, in particular this council, but Smith Falls has done almost all they can do with regard to helping this housing situation in Canada. I think we'll have done almost all we can in terms of changing bylaws, changing parking requirements. We've done quite a bit. And I think this is a perfect fit for that in terms of helping those who are less fortunate. But I also think we will have come to the place where I'm not sure how much more a municipality could or should do. But yes, I'm very supportive of the town, of the recommendation of staff.
Thank you, Mayor Paykel.
Good, thank you. As we heard earlier tonight, municipally, we've come a long way, and we're in a very good situation financially, and we're a growing and prospering community. But at the same time, we know that this growth is not extended to everyone, and unfortunately, there is a fallout. And we've seen it. We hear from on a regular basis about the cost of rental units in town, and the barrier that has become for many members of our community. We established a housing task force as a key outcome of our strategic plan for this term of council. I still have my whiteboard right here. Affordable housing is one of our key strategic priorities. And in this instance, we had 17 recommendations from the task force, which we've been implementing through the Housing Advisory Committee, one being the provision of municipally owned land for affordable housing. And this fits perfectly within that, and we could not have a better partner. I think it's probably early to suggest that this could all be rent to income. Of course, there'll be partnerships required with the county. There's a lot of funding sources that we needed to pull this together, but we know that Carebridge has demonstrated to us the ability to put together projects to leverage funding from other organizations to bring this attainable housing to the community. So perfect use for this property, perfect partner, the perfect combination of factors. I fully support option one.
Thank you. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Any other comments? Thumbs up. I certainly support it, and thank you to Carebridge. And I've listened to the Premier in the last few weeks saying they're going to be there and they need the municipalities to step up, and that's what we're doing. So we've done our part, Premier. Now hopefully you could do some of your part. So way to go. And that'll, I guess that will wait for the memorandum to come through to council before we do anything at council. Yes. Okay. Good. Okay, we got one more, and hopefully it's not too bad. The property standards bylaw, or the procedural bylaw is up just for a little review here, and I guess that's with you, CO Morris or Clerk Bennett. Nikki?
So.
Oh. What?
Oh.
Nikki, did you have your hand up?
I did. My suggestion was actually going to be that we move to defer it. I don't know about the rest of council, but I have a substantial number of comments about the document, and appreciating that Carrie is not here and that we have a special count next week. Perhaps we could defer it if she's back next week.
She is back next week.
Okay, I'll look to committee. It is closing on 3 hours, so I'm starting to mince my words and stuff as well. So, okay, you're off the hook, Malcolm. I guess we're going to defer that to next week. It would have been nice to talk about it tonight, but I think we've had a lot of talking and I'm getting hoarse. And I appreciate committee's indulgence on that. So that's it. I have a recommended motion that committee adjourn its proceedings. I'm going to say at 7:52 and stand so adjourned until the next duly called committee meeting. All in favor?
Oh, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
can we get a mover?
Sorry.
And seconder?
Oh, yes. Councillor Allen and Councillor Dwyer. And we all voted in favor. Sorry. Time to go home. Good evening.
Good, everyone.